Good morning. Thank you. We're really looking forward to this morning's presentation on planting your spring and summer vegetable garden in San Joaquin County. The timing is great for this presentation, and I want to thank you for carving out time in your schedule to attend today's program. I'm Robin Fuller. I'm a master gardener in San Joaquin County. And I want to go over a couple of housekeeping items before we dive in. So, number one, please keep yourself on mute during this presentation. It is being recorded. The recording will be posted to the San Joaquin Master Gardeners YouTube website at some point in the future, hopefully sooner rather than later. We try our best. If you have the ability to grab a paper and pencil, because I will share some keywords throughout this presentation so you can do your own search and find some of the documents I'm referencing, and I've kept it pretty simple for that. Due to the length and the diversity of the topics we're going to cover today, I intend to go straight through this presentation. It's very comprehensive. We have a lot of material. And so we are fortunate today to have two very experienced gardeners who are handling the chat room. And you may post your questions in the chat room and they will answer your questions there. So to introduce those two people, we have Marcy Souza. She is our UC San Joaquin County Master Gardener Program Coordinator. Wow, that's a mouthful. And she's an experienced gardener, very knowledgeable. And we have Kelly Gelderman, also a UC Master Gardener. She has 45 years of gardening experience. And if you attended the presentation on poisonous plants and pets, then you've been introduced to Kelly because she presented that. So, diving right in. I want to start just by sharing the UC Master Gardener Program mission statement. And our mission is to extend research-based knowledge and information. And I just want to put that out front so that you know the information we are sharing with you today is based on research. We're going to cover a lot of material today. We're going to talk about what I consider the garden foundations, the location, the soil, irrigation, climate. We're going to talk about the different kinds of gardens that you can consider for your vegetable garden. We're going to go over crops, planting schedules, seeds, transplants, safe materials to use, mulches, pesticides, touch on IPM, and we have a lengthy list of resources. So why plant a vegetable garden? Well, there's a lot of different reasons. If you're concerned about the climate, your vegetable garden reduces your carbon footprint on this planet. Your food is local. It's in your backyard or your front yard, wherever you plan to grow your garden. You can produce safe, high-quality food, depending upon your gardening practices. There's a lot of research done that kids eat more vegetables when they are introduced to vegetable gardening. And it's a really interesting topic. You can Google Cornell University. You can Google, I think it's University of Michigan. Both of those universities have done a compendium of research done on children and vegetables and gardening. Gardening is a great exercise. It's a good stress reliever. In fact, the Royal College of Physicians in London in 2018 published an abstract about the impacts of gardening and green spaces on health. And by the way, an abstract is just a summary of whatever they're referring to, a book or research paper. And they determined that there was increasing evidence that exposures to plants and green spaces was beneficial to both mental and physical health. And the U.S. National Institute of Health also republished that information. So it's borne out by the research. And gardening just makes you feel good, you know. It's just a great thing to do. So we put this right up front, maintenance time, because a lot of people make great efforts to plant a wonderful vegetable garden, and they don't think about the time it takes to maintain that garden. And we advise really thinking small initially, especially if you're a beginner gardener. Keeping your plants in good condition and the surrounding area, maintaining that may turn out to be more of a chore than you anticipate. So think small, maximize your success. Okay, some generic things to consider when you're planning your garden, and we'll talk about each of these more in depth. It's the location of your garden, what time of the year are you dealing with. Today we're going to focus on the spring and summer months. The condition of your soil, knowing what kind of soil you have, what you can do to improve it if it needs improvement, your irrigation, and the type and size of your garden. Some additional things to consider is the planting schedule. Keep in mind the 4 seasons of the year. Again, we're doing spring, summer today. If you've gone to great efforts to improve your soil and put in irrigation and do all those other things, we're in a year-round growing zone, so you can easily convert over to the fall, summer crops later on in the year. It's advised to plant vegetables that your family likes. I mean, if your family doesn't like arugula, it's probably not worth growing it unless you just want to give it a try and give it away. But to maximize your success and your benefit, think about what your family likes. And we're going to emphasize that reserve time to tend to your garden regularly. Okay, your garden, regardless of season, you want to choose your sunniest, best draining location. And for the spring, summer crops, a minimum rule of thumb is your plants require 6 to 8 hours of sunlight a day. And you want to think about a convenient water source for your garden. It's a real drag dragging a 50-foot hose out to water your garden. So think about that. You also want to factor in the shade areas in your garden caused by buildings, trees, plants, shrubs, fences, even crops. In the summer, a tall growing crop can cast shade on surrounding plants depending upon its location. So keep those things in mind. This is an illustration of the way the sun moves between the winter and summer months. And right now we're not too far off the winter solstice. So we're closer to that winter arc right now. And if you look at this diagram, you see the shadow cast by this building is on the north side of it, northwest side of it. In the summer months, that shadow will be greatly diminished. It might be only 1 or 2 feet off that building versus 30 feet off. Right now, at the deepest part, at the winter solstice, because I've been watching the shadows in my backyard, at least 1/3 of my backyard is in shadow from my house. In the summer months, that shadow is maybe a maximum of 3 feet. So that's a big difference. So keep it in mind. Zone maps. I want to introduce these zone maps because your hardiness zone is frequently referred to. So there's two hardiness zones you'll see referenced, and there's the USDA Zone 9B that covers most of San Joaquin County, and there's the Sunset Magazine Zone 14. So if you've joined us and you're in San Joaquin County, you're most likely in 9B and 14. And what's the difference? Well, the USDA zone map considers one thing and one thing only, and that is your lowest average winter temperatures, and it's in increments of 10 degrees. So in the United States, I believe there are only 10 zones under the USDA zone map. The Sunset Magazine zone designations are based upon a more comprehensive set of conditions. They consider climate, rainfall, average low temperatures, average high temperatures. In California alone, there are 20 Sunset Magazine zone designations. So it's a much more refined listing. However, a lot of times you'll see Sunset Zone 9 and know that if that's the only reference, there's a good chance you're in 9, but 9B is a more finite designation. It designates a differential of average low winter temperatures of 5 degrees. So that's that B on the 9. Okay, moving on. What type of soil do you have? This is elemental. You really need to understand what kind of soil you have. The ideal soil type is loam. Most of us aren't blessed with that in San Joaquin County. Most of us have clay or we have sand, from my understanding. So there's simple types of ways to figure out your soil property, and this is worth something to write down because I'm not going to go over this in depth. You can determine the physical properties of your soil by doing a simple ribbon test, and you can Google that, ribbon test, and it will tell you how to do a ribbon test. And we have illustrations here of a very sandy soil on the top left. The opposite is that clay soil in the bottom right, and that's what most of us are dealing with. What we're shooting for is the clay loam or the loamy sand. In knowing your soil type is going to affect how often you irrigate, how often you fertilize, how and when you till the soil, and it affects your plant health and growth. And this photograph here is the same plants. I think this comes from Lawrence Livermore, the photograph. And you can see a wonderful, healthy root structure on the plant on the left-hand side of the image versus I can't even see the roots in the image on the right, on the plant on the right. And, you're really shooting for a healthy root structure. So getting your soil to the proper kind of soil is very beneficial. Healthy soils, I mentioned it. We're going to amend our clay soil to loamy clay, and we want to amend our sandy soil to loamy sand. This is a process that takes time. It doesn't happen naturally. You're going to have to give it some help. And I put in this link for carbon sequestration because it's becoming a bigger and bigger deal in gardening. And those are two keywords. You could do a Google search on carbon sequestration. It's very important. And there's a lot of interesting research that's coming out about carbon sequestration and healthy soils. Excuse me, I'm sorry, didn't mean to go ahead. The recipe for converting your clay or your sandy soil to loam or sandy loam or clay loam is by adding organic material, and most often that is compost. And the organic principle suggests feeding your soil to make healthier soil, because as that last picture showed you, if you have healthier soil, you're going to have healthier plants. And these images here, or maybe these are the ones from Lawrence Livermore, I can't remember. Anyway, what you're seeing on the left is mycorrhizae. And mycorrhizae is indicative of healthy soil. So if you see that white cottony web in your soil, it means your soil is healthy. It's what you're shooting for. Don't be afraid of that white, the white that you see in your soil. And then there were some studies done, and you can see from the picture that the plant grown with no mycorrhizae in the soil has a much diminished root structure versus the plant on the right that was grown in a mycorrhizae rich soil. So feed your soil. I mentioned that the recipe for improving your soil is adding compost, and compost is like a miracle. It is a lot of gardeners call it garden gold, and it improves your soil pH balance. It minimizes runoff. We showed you the picture with the stronger roots. Stronger roots, healthier plants. You're going to have enhanced flower and fruit production. It's feeding your soil, so there's you can rely less on chemical fertilizers. The benefits are just wonderful. So a rule of thumb about compost in your garden is first test your soil, and we have links for places where you can have your soil tested. I think the 3 links we included, they're fairly inexpensive. They were all around $20 a test. You can increase the price if you, some of them were sort of like a menu, choose what you want tested. So have your soil tested, do it in a couple of spots if you can, if you're planning on having a huge vegetable garden. Then add 2 to 4 inches into new beds. That's your beds that haven't previously been amended. And then thereafter, add about approximately an inch each year. And it's really okay just to lay the compost on your soil surface. You can dig it in a little bit if you want, but it's not necessary. Just lay it on your on the top of your soil. Oh boy, make your own compost. Well, that's a whole class in and of itself. But the thing about compost is there are many ways to achieve it, and you can make compost fairly quickly by following recipes you can find. I think, yes, there's a link here. Write this down. UCANR 8037. If you write down those two separate words, I called the number words, but you get the idea. UCANR 8037. That is a great link for making compost. But no, you can pile up your leaves in an unused space in your garden and just let them sit for a year. And at the end of a year, you're going to have fabulous compost. So that's pretty effortless. Also, if you do that, you're helping to reduce green waste, and we should all be shooting for that. And then there's the more complicated, and they're really not that complicated, but there's other recipes for making compost. So again, UCANR 8037. I'm sorry I can't talk about it more this morning, but that's a great link right there. How often to irrigate? Part of this is going to be dictated by the climate, how hot it is, how cold it is, and the condition of your soil. But, ideally, You should never have to do daily irrigation for an established garden. Uh, if you're doing container gardening, well, that's an exception. Uh, so you do need to water new transplants and seedlings. And when I say water, I mean gently water on a daily basis until they're established. Then these are rules of thumb: every 2 days for sand, may be needed for sandy soil, every 4 days for loam or clay soils, and weekly for deep rooted crops. So another way to measure whether you need to water I don't recommend this for seedlings or transplants. We're talking about your established plants, is when the top 1 to 2 inches of soil have dried out. And how do you figure that out? Well, you stick your finger in the soil and poke around in there and go down an inch or two and see if it's dried out. You can conserve water by mulching around your plants. Just to note that if you plan to put in a row garden with a furrow irrigation system, it's really not water wise. We recommend drip. Drip is the most conservative way you can consistently water. Oh, I want to go back to this for a moment here. When you water, when you water, if you're experiencing runoff, okay, so you're out there watering your garden and the water is running off to where your garden isn't located, that means your soil has absorbed as much moisture as it can at that time. It doesn't mean you've watered deeply enough. It just means the water's running off. And so pay attention to that, because if your water's running off, you're wasting water. And what you need to do is water in cycles. So maybe you've watered for 10 minutes and the water's starting to run off. Well, then stop. Wait until the water's absorbed and water again. There are a lot of timer systems that allow you to set them for cycles, but pay attention to it because we all have a mandate to conserve water. So how much water you use will depend upon the root depth of your plants. And it's good to know which of your plants are shallow rooted, which of your plants are deep rooted, so that you can adequately and properly water your crops. Okay, we're going to move into the type and size of garden. And for your planning, there are a number of different ways you can grow your vegetables. And we're going to talk about each of these: containers, rows, raised beds, windowsills, and we're going to talk about safe materials. Okay, container gardening. There's advantages and disadvantages. If you don't have space to put in a raised bed or a mounded garden, maybe all you have is a concrete patio. Well, then container gardening is probably the solution for you. It's wise to consider tall pots if you have difficulties getting down to ground level. Containers have a very small footprint and you can move them around. So maybe you don't have 6 to 8 hours of sun every day on your patio, but if you're really into it, you can put that container on top of one of those little wheel platforms and roll it around with the sun. I've been that desperate before, so I've actually done it. Some of the disadvantages about container gardening: well, they do need to be watered and fertilized more frequently. Uh, they need protection from the heat sometimes, and you do need to replace that potting soil more frequently. We don't recommend using your garden soil to fill your containers. Go get a potting mix or make your own. When choosing your containers have to have a drain hole. It's just that simple. You don't want your plant sitting in a, a container without a drain hole. It's likely the roots are going to rot. And you need to properly match the size of your container to the root depth and size of your plants. And I crack up every time I see this photo on the right because it looks cute. I mean, I think it looks adorable. But on the bottom right step there, I'm pretty sure they're trying to grow rosemary. And anybody who's grown rosemary knows that it's going to quickly exceed the size of that pot. So that's wrong plant, wrong pot. And then to the right, I've tried to figure out what's in that pot, but let's assume it's lavender. Again, same problem as with the rosemary. So definitely, word of caution, choose the right size pot. I love these two examples of containers, the wine barrel and the strawberry pots. They both have a very sufficient volume of soil to handle the plants that are growing in it. And both of those pots would, well, I don't know about the strawberry pot, but the wine barrel would also be suitable for a number of other deep-rooted crops. There are metal alternatives available. This is a gutter garden on the left. They would work for shallow rooted crops. You would have to water very frequently. I put in a gutter garden of the irrigation was really a challenge, and I had it on a drip irrigation system. And then the clay pots, again, choose the right size pot for your crops because all of these crops here, oregano, parsley, basil, and chives, I personally think those pots all look too small for those plants. But you know, if that's all you have the space for, you could grow basil like that, which is far too many seeds for that little type pot, and cut your crop off and maybe use it for like microgreens. I don't know. Grow bags, those have made a big splash on the market. This one certainly appears to have a good volume. I think it would work well for a lot of vegetables. Remember that it's made of felt and it will dry out quickly. The benefit, though, is that your root zone will have the benefit of aeration because that felt is porous. And then there's a number of plastic pots. And one of the benefits of plastic pots is that the water is not going to evaporate out of it as quickly. So lots of alternatives. There's even recycled alternatives, and both of these look really great. I mean, they have a lot of visual appeal. I'm not so certain about the crops they've chosen to grow in these or plants. The middle plant in the soda bottles appears to be either fennel or dill. I'm not sure which one. And that particular container is far too small for either fennel or dill. Ditto for the plant on the right in the soda bottles. I think that looks like it's rosemary. That's not going to grow well there. So consider your plants, consider your containers. Some rules of thumb about container soil. Edibles use a lot of nutrients. And so for your container soil, first of all, it's going to settle as the growing season wears on, but you want to at least replace 1/3 of that soil each season. So dig it out. It's been nutrient depleted and replace it. Tomatoes, which are really heavy feeders, you want to use fresh soil each season. And crop rotation, we're going to talk about that a little bit more, but rotating crops is really recommended to prevent diseases. Okay, next type of gardening, row gardening. If you live in San Joaquin County, you've seen this. It's the traditional way that crops are grown in the United States. And for the home gardener, the advantages are, I think the primary advantage is the lower cost. I mean, you can put one in with, I think, no money. It has that neat traditional old-fashioned vegetable garden look. If your crops are planted in a row, they're easier to protect from extremes in the weather, and they're easy to construct. The downside is there's a really good likelihood you're going to produce less vegetables in a row garden than you would in not a container, but a raised bed. So your yields are likely to be smaller, particularly if you're using the soil, your current soil, which is San Joaquin County, sandy or clay. So consider that. The water loss is considerably higher if you're watering via a furrow. That's a irrigation ditch down the side of your row. So that uses a lot more water, and row gardens tend to use more space. So we have an example of actually a very nice looking row garden on the right. I don't know what they're trying to grow, but it's been planned well. There's pathways for a person to walk down. So at least the plants aren't going to suffer from soil compaction. I don't see any furrows for irrigation, so we're going to hope this is on a drip irrigation system and not an overhead irrigation system, which is the most wasteful way to water your vegetable garden. To the left is a mounding system, and these are really increasing in popularity. And this is also very low cost to get into. And what you're doing is amending the soil on top of you're creating soil on top of your existing whatever you have. And you can build that up over time, and it's a lot less costly than going into a raised bed garden, and you get some of the benefits. Okay. Raised beds. Well, these have become enormously popular, and for a lot of reasons. I mean, they're very easy to maintain. There's a lot less weeding, depending upon the height of your raised bed. You can have tremendous yields out of a small raised bed. I think the primary disadvantage is they're expensive to make. And they don't work well for melons and corn. And so those are some considerations. If you make your raised bed out of wood, at some point in time, you're going to have to replace that wood. But some of the other advantages are when you garden in a raised bed or even in a mounded bed like we saw in the last illustration, you only need to apply fertilizer to the area where your plants are. So that's good. You're not broadcasting fertilizer over areas where you don't want to grow things. And root crops grow especially well in raised beds because raised beds tend to be fast draining, and the soil is loose. The soil will warm up in your raised beds quicker than it will if you did a row type crop. So you can get an earlier start on your planting season. They're also easy to frame and cover to protect your plants from the hot summer sun and frost. Oh, and also you can even use protective coverings to keep out unwanted pests. You know, the disadvantages are the cost to create a raised bed. So it is an investment. It uh, it's a consideration. We're going to talk a little bit along here about, I don't know if it's the next slide now. We're going to talk about materials and using safe materials because we have some information we want to share about that on raised beds. So a general rule of thumb is to not make your raised beds more than 4 feet wide. And that is so that you can reach into the middle of the bed. And you don't want to be standing in the middle of your raised bed. You've gone to the effort of building it, filling it with fabulous soil, and then when you walk on it, you're compacting the soil, and that's something we try to avoid. So here's some more benefits of raised beds. This is an illustration of a raised bed with a framing. It looks like out of PVC pipe, and that would be an easy way to stretch something across it to provide for frost or sun protection. And well, we're in year-round growing, so it's not really like you even need to create a greenhouse type of effect. That sorry about that. So here's a couple of illustrations of raised beds, both of them very nice. I love the illustration, the photograph on the right, because that is a very easy way to build a trellis on your raised bed. Now, by the way, that's a fairly shallow raised bed. It's what, 8 or 12 inches, I'm not certain. So it's really only suited for shallow rooted crops. And it looks like that's what they've attempted to plant in there. I see lettuce in the front and some pollinators. I don't know if those are marigolds or something else. But back to this trellising system, this is a very simple way. It's a netting, a commercial netting, you can buy them online, stretched between a couple of poles. And it appears that they are attempting to grow cucumbers up this netting. It's a very easy way to grow vertically at the side of that raised bed and still have quite a variety of crops in the front of it. Whew. Okay, windowsill gardens. Well, let's start with the window with a lot of light. And I mean, if this is all you have available for your gardening, then it is what it is. The picture on the left is a number of herbs, most of which are going to perish in a month or two, if not sooner, just because they're wrong plant, wrong pot. You know, you'll get a little bit of satisfaction, hopefully, out of it for a month or two, but don't expect it to flourish. Windowsill gardens would really be great for microgreens. And, you know, microgreens are fun to explore. Cilantro, if you like cilantro, I know a number of people don't, but cilantro microgreens are fabulous. I mean, just 2 or 3 sprigs of a cilantro microgreen packs a huge punch and flavor. Same for arugula. So there's something you might want to explore. Okay, safe materials. A lot of research has been done on materials to use in gardens, and a lot of research still needs to be done. So if you're going to build a raised bed, we recommend you use ACQ pressure treated wood or woods with natural rot resistance. So that would be cedar, it would be redwood, or other non-treated woods. Cedar and redwood are both expensive. So that's if you're using wood. If you use other materials, bricks, stones, concrete, make and especially if they've been reclaimed or recycled, make sure you know the source, because there may be unknown toxins, and there's a lot of nasty stuff out there you want to not introduce into your garden. You don't want them around your plants. You don't want them around your children, and you don't want to contaminate your soil. So a couple of things we really try to avoid in our gardens are lead, asbestos, methyl bromide, and solvents. Um, uh, so some of these hopefully make common sense. I don't know, but you definitely want to avoid railroad ties. They're covered in creosote. It's a whole bunch of nasty chemicals that are in railroad ties that you don't want near your vegetables. CCA, pressure treated wood, that's the wood that was treated wood that was available, I believe, before 2003. Um, uh, and that A in CCA, that stands for arsenate. And you just don't want arsenate or arsenic in your garden. It builds up in your body, by the way. Uh, Repurposed painted lumber. So most of you probably know lead was outlawed in home paint sometime in the 80s, I believe. But that old repurposed lumber that has been painted, there's a good chance it was painted with leaded paint. Leaded paint flakes off, and it just stays. It doesn't disappear. So don't introduce repurposed painted lumber into your garden. Ditto for pallets. You know, these pallet gardens are very popular these days. It's very common for pallets to be fumigated with methyl bromide, and they're stamped MB if they are. And methyl bromide has been outlawed. It's a pesticide fumigant, and it's been banned in the United States for agricultural purposes. It's still widely used in industrial purposes, and it's a nasty chemical. Okay, this illustration, uh, more research needs to be done on these items. And right now, rubber tires are a bit controversial uh, in terms of the research data. So it's up to you. You have to decide if you want to introduce rubber tires into your vegetable garden or not. I mean, it's safe to say that rubber tires have been exposed to hazardous substances, just vis-a-vis their usage. You don't know where they've been. So don't introduce them into your landscape if toxicity is a concern for you. So recycled rubber products generally aren't recommended, but the research literature is it's being debated. Galvanized containers, these are also very popular these days. And when steel is galvanized, it's done through a process that uses zinc. And a little bit of zinc in the body is not harmful. In fact, it's essential. But a lot of zinc is poisonous. And right now, from what I've been able to determine from the research literature, zinc doesn't travel through the soil. So if you have zinc beds and are using them for your vegetable gardens, keep those root vegetables a minimum of 5 inches away from the edge. The other thing about zinc is that it leaches into your soil. So if you don't want to introduce potentially harmful substances into your soil, you might want to avoid galvanized metals. And then the pellets. Well, I already touched on palettes. The thing I didn't mention is painted palettes. You might want to avoid painted palettes too, because or soiled palettes. It's indicative of, potentially indicative of exposure to chemicals and solvents. Who knows? Who knows what's on it? So you want fresh, untreated palettes for your palette garden if that's the way you choose to garden. We mentioned the railroad ties. They're just downright unsafe in your vegetable garden. The painted wood is just downright unsafe for your vegetable garden. Woo! Okay. Planning your garden. This is actually kind of fun. Figure out the space you have for your garden, keeping in mind that 6 to 8 hours minimum sun requirement per day. And then map it out. Map out the area that you've determined to scale. Draw in the crops you'd like to plant. And when you draw in those crops, remember that little tiny tomato seed or that whatever seed you're using has the potential to become a huge plant. So keep in mind the size of the plants you're putting in. Definitely allow space for paths unless you're doing raised bed gardening, because you want to avoid soil compaction around the root zone of your vegetables. If you haven't already done so, now's a great time to order seed catalogs and or start purchasing seeds. How do you know what to plant when? Again, here's something to write down. UCANR 84716. That's UCANR space 84716. If you do a Google search for that, you're going to pull up this planting guide. It's a vegetable planting guide, and it's a really wonderful tool because what it will show you is what crops you can be planting by seed and by transplant for each month of the year. And it shows you the anticipated harvest. Now, this isn't hard and fast. It's a rule of thumb, this planting guide, because you're going to have microclimates to deal with. You're going to have unanticipated weather events. Maybe we're going to get a hard frost in March. Who knows? So just remember, this is a guide. If you follow if you can consider and follow planting your seeds and plant transplants every 2 weeks, and this works really good for your spring and quick growing crops, your lettuces, arugula, whatever. If your plants you put in your seeds you put in that germinated came up the third week of February, and then we had a hard frost that last week of February. But you've got plants to put in 2 weeks, 2 weeks later. Yes, it's sad you've lost that crop, but you've planned ahead. You're going to have a backup, so to speak. Also, it extends your harvest time so that, you don't have 20 heads of lettuce that are ready for harvest at the same time. So think about that. And because it's January, you have time to really plan this out and be successful at it. So what else can I tell you about that planting guide? Well, UCANR 84716. It's definitely worth downloading and either printing out or having it on your desktop. Okay, so this is a rule of thumb, but the last and first frost dates let me go back to that planting guide for a second. I'm sorry, 84716. I was told this morning, so that planting guide says it's for San Joaquin Valley Gardens. And I was told this morning that it's actually for Tulare and King County. And they have a slightly earlier planting climate than we do. So take that into account when you download that planting guide. First and last frost dates. In San Joaquin County, the first frost date is usually mid-December. The last frost date is usually the end of February. You've been around this winter. We haven't had that many frosts. I don't think we've had any really hard frosts. At least I haven't in my back garden. Typically, in years in the past, I've run out there with floating row covers to protect orchids and things like that. So far this year, if we've hit below 32, and I'm speaking of my back garden, I don't recall a time we've hit below 32. So I haven't run out with floating row cover once this year to protect any of my frost sensitive plants. There's still time. We could still get those hard frosts. It's unpredictable, but as a rule of thumb, that gives you a way to think about it. Going back to this for a minute, if you plan on germinating seeds, and especially for your spring crops, your soil temperatures right now are not high enough to germinate many crops. And so if you want to plant lettuce and you want it to germinate fairly quickly, go ahead and plant a few seeds inside and then transplant out to your garden. Seeds you put in for lettuce now, well, they may germinate. They may germinate in March when the soil temperature warms up, so keep it in mind. Record keeping. This is actually kind of fun and highly recommended. It's fun to keep a garden log. It's also beneficial because if you like to experiment and put in, say, Russian kale versus another dinosaur kale or whatever, it's good to note the variety that you put into your garden. So if you like it, you can go back and refer to it. Hopefully you've noted that in your garden log. I really love that variety. If you didn't like it or it was unsuccessful in your garden, it's also good to note that. Keep notes of when you plant things, when you harvest things, what the weather's been like, where you planted your crops in your garden. That goes back to that plotting your garden map. You want to kind of keep that from year to year so you can remember what you planted where. Take pictures, do whatever. You can draw around the edges if that's your thing. And keep notes of pests and other challenges you have in your garden. If you haven't had any, you're the miracle. Some tips on storing seeds. Seeds are going up in price. They do degrade year over year, but depending upon what it is, it's maybe 5% or more. It's not a huge amount. Keep your seeds in a sealed container in your refrigerator. If you're harvesting seeds, know that if you harvest seeds from hybrids, they're generally not viable. So for me, if I wanted to harvest seeds from my Sun Gold cherry tomato, it's not going to be viable. I'm not going to end up with the same plant. So buy seeds, do your research and buy seeds that are good for our climate and your soil conditions. You can get a lot of information from seed packets. And excuse me for a moment. I need to do a quick time check to see what time we're at. Okay, phew. There's a lot of information on seed packets. And if you like to order seed catalogs, they generally have a lot of information as well. And you can extend your research by, that plant sounds really interesting in the catalog. Well, do some further Google research if you need to. Make sure it's suitable for your climate and our growing conditions. So the image on the right here, we can see that it's a super steak hybrid. So remember that, 6 months, 9 months out, if you wanted to save seeds from this tomato, it's not recommended. It's a hybrid. Um, Something else to note on the front of this seed package is it says BFN resistant. Well, maybe you're familiar with that, and maybe you're not. If I was standing in a store and I saw that seed packet, my smartphone would come out, and I would Google that BFN resistant. I would do a search on it. Well, I happen to know that this is a tomato that is resistant to verticillium, fusarium, and root knot nematodes. And all of those are soil-borne diseases and very common here in the San Joaquin Valley. And so this would be something that would intrigue me because I would want to find a BFN resistant tomato. Then on the back side of your seed packet, there's a lot of information on the back side. And, again, take it with a grain of salt. It will tell you suggested planting times for your zone, which you can refine from the information I gave you earlier. Remember, we're zone 9B or 14. It will tell you planting depth, planting spacing. Typically, they indicate how long out to your first harvest. It varies, seed manufacturers vary, the information is going to vary, but read the seed packets because there is a lot of information there. Okay, so we want to talk about when you plant from seed. The seed size determines the depth from which your seedling can emerge from the planting medium. And so the simple rule is remember to never plant your seeds deeper than 2 to 3 times the width of the seed or the length of the seed. Now the width of the seed. So we mention this because there's a tendency to plant seeds too deeply. And so just remember that. Don't plant deeper than 2 to 3 times the width of the seed as a rule of thumb. And if you have a lot of birds in your garden and you're planting direct seed to soil, like you would do for radishes and things like that, you can protect your seeds that have been newly planted. Birds love seeds. I've learned this the hard way. With a floating row cover just on there until the seedlings emerge. A note about thinning, we advise be ruthless. And I know it's hard to thin your plants. They're wonderful to watch when they emerge, but definitely you have got to be ruthless. And we don't recommend pulling the seedlings. You want to cut them off with a pair of scissors or, depending on, get out there and cut them off with a pair of scissors. And depending upon what you're growing, if it's arugula, cilantro, a lot of those you can use in your salads. So it's not entirely wasted. Okay, transplants. If you've grown your own transplants, you have a lot of control. You have maximum control over your variety. You can order up the seeds, grow the seedlings, and really hone in on the particular varieties you want to grow. And there's a number of reasons why people purchase transplants too. I mean, a lot of people just don't have the inclination to start their plants from seed. It's fine. There's a lot of different kinds of plants, transplants you can go out and buy. Purchase transplants if you didn't get your seedlings started early enough. You can still start seedlings depending upon your growing schedule, but you can also put in transplants to get an earlier start, and then you can stagger your harvest. Um, Seedlings, early transplants are more prone to pests. And seeds, for example, I gave you the birds like to eat the seeds, but a lot of garden critters love seedlings as well. Uh, so you have to provide an extra layer of protection for your seedlings. So you can minimize early pest problems by utilizing transplants. Improve crop vigor on, yeah, maybe not. It depends. If you buy good transplants, and we're going to talk about that, or have grown good transplants, then yes, you can. Okay, so buying transplants, they're almost entirely sold in containers. I'm trying to think. Bare root. If for some reason you come across bare root transplants, um, and you can see the root structure, make sure that they are white, intact, well hydrated roots. You don't want to see a bunch of dried roots down in the root ball. Um, a lot of master gardeners, myself included, I have to confess, we like to sort of gently wiggle those transplants out of a little 6-pack or 4-pack or single and take a look at the root structure, because by looking at it, you can see the condition of that plant. And this image here, if this plant had roots that were circled around it multiple times, I personally would tend not to buy it. I mean, if it was the only plant I was desperate to have it, I just had to have it, I might. But if it's circled in white roots, almost encased entirely, and I've seen this plenty of times, its roots, it's outgrown its little soil structure, and that plant is not in the best condition it could be. It's root bound. It's not in the best condition it should be for you when you're buying transplants. Again, know your planting zones. I've mentioned it. I'll do it again. 9B and 14. Okay. So, if you look at the root zones, you can also make sure they're healthy and free from obvious pests. If there's little snails in there, I might not want to introduce those into my garden, or any more of them into my garden. You want to look for healthy plants. That's the rule of thumb. Look for healthy plants when purchasing transplants. Because you can buy transplants and introduce pests. You can introduce weeds into your garden. Keep in mind that the transplants that are in your box store or in your local nursery, those are sort of the most generic, popular kinds of vegetables that most people want. So again, if you want to grow something different, you love a particular variety, your best bet may be from seed. Okay, starting your own transplants. A lot of us think this is fun. Some people don't. The illustration on the left, which is a clam shell with a potting medium for transplants. And by the way, your little seedlings, they really should be indulged with a special kind of growing medium. You want a very loose, very quick draining soil. And so when you purchase transplants, you'll notice there's a lot of perlite in those pots, generally speaking, more so than you would probably end up ultimately with in your vegetable garden. That's to make the soil very aerated and very loose, and that's what you're shooting for your seedlings. So the picture on the left, that's a clamshell. It looks to have, I don't know, inch and a half a potting medium in it. It seems to have a fairly shallow lid on it. Uh, that actually is one of my favorite ways of growing seedlings. I typically try to find clamshells with a deeper lid on them. Uh, but what it allows me to do is germinate those seeds fairly quickly, because you can put that lid on there and create a little microclimate, like a little mini greenhouse. Um, I pay attention to the temperature of my soil when I'm germinating seeds. So I use a heat pad to warm up the soil. Unfortunately, my countertops where I grow seedlings, they're very cold. They're stone and they just don't warm up. So I put down towels, put down a heating mat, a couple more layers of towels, because my heating pad doesn't, the cool cycle of my heating pad is too hot for heat seedlings. So I tend to buffer it with some layers of towels. On the upper right, we have, the dream type of way of germinating seeds. Those are some sort of planting trays with a nice looking growing medium and grow lights. And, people swear by grow lights. I've never had any. I did purchase one for this year. So that's the dream way of germinating seedlings. One caution for using grow lights is you want to get those lights down fairly close to the plant. Otherwise, your plant is going to stretch to try to reach the sun, or excuse me, the light, but the idea is the sun. You can end up, pardon me, with some really nice looking seedlings fairly easily. See this tomato plant on the bottom right here? That appears to be 2 tomato plants that grew in that little pot. Yes, it is. I had to look at it up close, pardon me. Not a good idea to plant that as is. So you've got to thin, you've got to be ruthless. The way to thin this tomato plant, and it's at the right size where you would do it, is choose the weaker of those 2 plants and gently snip it off with a pair of scissors down at the base of the plant down near the soil, and allow the other one to grow. Okay, if you start transplants, you have to remember to harden them off. So your transplants have been grown indoors somewhere, most likely, or in some sort of protected area outdoors. And I'm not going to go into it today, but go onto the internet and find a good hardening off schedule. And I think I found one last night. The University of Illinois Extension had a really nice 7 to 14 day hardening off schedule. So the idea and the goal of hardening off is to slowly expose the plants you've germinated and grown to the outdoor elements. And the goal of the process is to strengthen those plants. So when you harden off your plants, it's going to, for a brief period, slow down the growth of your plant. And the goal is to increase root development. And so that's just one of the by-sides of hardening off your plants for planting outdoors. And I won't go into it more in depth, but there's a lot of cellular things that happen with your plants when they go through the hardening off process. So find a reliable hardening off process. And there's oh my goodness, there's a lot of bad information on the internet about gardening, and maybe it works for some people. So we want to caution you to use research-based information. And so when I'm citing information during a presentation, I'm typically using academic sources for that information. That's the most reliable information I know how to find. So again, the University of Illinois extension had a nice 7 to 14 day hardening off process. Okay. So you've germinated your plants, you've maybe purchased some transplants. Remember, they're very tender. You've hardened off those plants, you've devoted some time and energy into this. They're going to need a little more help while they're babies to thrive in your garden. So provide protection from the sun, the frost, and wind as needed. And remember, snails and slugs and whatever other critters roam through your garden, they love seedlings. So give them some protection. Don't forget, even though it's cold outside as it is here right now, we haven't had rainfall in, I don't even remember the last day it rained here. You still need to water your garden. So, so give them water if they need it. Do that soil test. Remember, seedlings going to need a little more frequent watering than they would once they've established their roots. A couple of ways to protect your plants. You can certainly use recycled plastic containers. An easy way, very effective. That recycled milk jug is going to protect your plants from sun, heavy rain, probably slugs and snails, unless they're inside the perimeter of that jug. So they work very well. Also, these little berry baskets work very well too. They're not going to necessarily protect your plant from frost or excessive rain, but they will keep out squirrels and other kind of pests that may roam through your garden. This is just sort of a miscellaneous tip about sun exposure for your garden, is to remember your tall crops and remember what you plant near them, because you don't want those tall crops shading out your nearby sun-loving crops. And also to plant your corn in blocks, because the tassels are going to pollinate. I said fertilize, I meant pollinate the nearby plants. So definitely put them in blocks. Okay, crop rotation. There's many studies on the benefits of crop rotation. And crop rotation is suggested and encouraged because there's various components from practicing crop rotation that benefit your soil health and also provide protection for your plants. So some of the major advantages of crop rotation are controlling diseases, soil-borne diseases. And I mentioned that tomato package that had BFN, right? Verticulum fusarium and root nematodes. Those are all soil-borne diseases, and they're pretty common out here in San Joaquin Valley, and they love to attack tomatoes. So if you don't plant your tomato plants and other crops, but I'm using tomatoes as an illustration, in the same place every year, you reduce the likelihood of having that problem year after year. Then there are other crops that fix nitrogen in the soil. And so your soil will benefit from moving your crops around. So you can contribute to your healthy soil and diminish the likelihood of soil-borne diseases. Is two major benefits of crop rotation. And so we talked about succession planting every 2 weeks. If you're able to do that, It's a bit of a commitment, but you can think ahead. We've got the time. Uh, okay, so vertical gardening. The I mentioned that photograph in one of the earlier slides about that simple trellis to install. It was a couple of poles with a netting stretched across it. There's there's a number of crops that do really well on trellises. In fact, they do better on trellises. Uh, your pole beans, your cucumbers, some melons. In fact, quite a few melons can be trellised. Uh, the air circulation amongst the leaves contributes to healthier plants. And, if you don't want to trellis pole beans, then buy bush beans. I mean, they're designed to grow upwards. And cucumbers that are grown on a trellis, they just look more beautiful. I mean, the cucumbers themselves grow better on trellises. Um, so to practice crop rotation, you need to understand the family, the the scientific family your crops are a part of. And there's the scientific name, and then there's the sort of generic name. And so when we talk of nightshades, that's the generic name for a family of crops. And nightshades are a particular crop that is particularly susceptible to soil-borne diseases. So it's worthwhile to know your nightshade family of crops. Oh yes, it is. It's here on the next page. So over here, you'll see under the nightshade family on the right column, the third column on this slide. In the nightshade plant family is eggplant, tomato, peppers, potatoes. I think it includes petunias, tomatillos. It's more extensive than what is listed here. But if you're going to practice crop rotation, and we recommend that, when you're planning out your vegetable garden, you don't want to put an eggplant into where your tomato plant was last year. That's not crop rotation. You want to put a something from the cucumber family, cucumber, muskmelon, pumpkin, squash, watermelon, over where your eggplant, tomato, pepper, potatoes were growing. And I'm saying that by way of example. I mean, you can choose from one of the other families, but stay outside that family, because to rotate your tomato to the place where you grew eggplants last year, that's not crop rotation. I want to go back to slide. Okay. And I'm sorry if I keep on leaning into the screen, but it's the only way I can read some of that up close. So, crop rotation, I mentioned it enhances soil fertility. And it definitely does do this if you are rotating your crops and putting a nitrogen fixing plant into an area of your garden that was previously used by a nitrogen depriving. There are a lot of plants that are very heavy feeders, tomatoes, for example. It's going to deplete the soil of its nutrients. You can fix that soil through very careful crop rotation and enhance your soil fertility without having to rely on adding chemical fertilizers into your garden. And so it's worth doing a little bit of research. A lot of the cover crops that you can grow in the winter months, and for those, and I didn't mention biodiversity earlier, I probably should have, but you can do some research, and I believe you can even purchase pre-mixed formulas of cover crops to introduce into your beds over the winter months. to fix nitrogen in your soil. And it's a very organic way of growing. And if you don't plan on putting a winter crop into that area of your garden, you're improving your soil health. Okay, I mentioned crop rotation to reduce soil-borne diseases. Okay, the family of crops. You can search for these one by one, or search for a listing of families, but know your families to successfully rotate your crops. Edible landscaping. Okay, I was just doing a time check. Okay, I got to speed it up here. Edible landscaping is just one alternative to grow vegetables. It's a really beautiful flower garden here, and it looks like they have either a melon or some sort of, no, it's not a melon, a zucchini or some sort of squash crop intermingled into this floral garden, and that probably be really successful actually, because the squash there, look at all the pollinators around it. You wouldn't have to get in there and hand pollinate your plants. Hopefully those blooming plants around it will attract enough pollinators to pollinate your squash. These are just other pretty pictures of ways to grow vegetables mixed in with your ornamental plants. Down here we've got some cabbages, possibly, I don't know if those are onion or garlic or alliums back there. And over here again, what appears to be cabbage. Let me see, what does it say up there? It's bok choy and cabbages mixed in. This looks like it might even be onions or garlic or something. Here's an apple tree that's introduced as part of the landscape. Okay, benefits of growing vertically. I touched on that with the cucumbers and pole beans. Other benefits, it requires less space. You don't have to bend over all the time. I mentioned this, the air circulation and sunlight to the foliage. It just creates a healthier plant. And yeah, do you want to eat a cucumber that's been sitting on the ground or that's been growing vertically? So, yep, cucumbers, there we go. Intercropping or interplanting, and I really love this idea, and it's widely advised, and there's a number of reasons. Okay, so the idea between intercropping or interplanting is to plant two vegetables, one that's fast maturing and one that's slow maturing. And so right here, we've got cabbage or broccoli or not, I don't know what it is, cabbage growing with lettuces. The lettuces are obviously going to be ready for harvest much quicker than the other crop in this garden. So you can be growing two crops at the same time and also keeping your growing area full of plants is great for weed suppression because those the floating seeds in the air just don't have a chance to settle on the soil surface. It's a great way to increase the productivity from your growing area. Okay, regenerative practices. This is becoming more and more adopted, and regenerative agricultural practices are, there's quite a few institutes now, research-based institutes that have established organizations that are studying regenerative practices. Part of this is coming about because the industrial farming practices, the row planting, have been very destructive for our soil and our environment. They've contributed to ozone depletion. The depth of the topsoil in the Midwestern United States, the Great Plains area, has diminished greatly over time, greatly. And so regenerative practices focus on sequestering carbon in the soil, restoring the soil health, and contributing positively to the climate and the environment. And these practices, the basic parts of these practices, the protocol is to disturb your soil as little as possible. So we're tending to go towards not recommending rototilling your soil. If you need to disturb the surface of your soil, just do it minimally at a few inches. We tend to, this regenerative practices suggest building soil health on top of what you have. It emphasizes biodiversity, crop diversity, creating healthy soils. And one of the key elements, and I find this really interesting, and I'm doing a test practice for myself out in my back garden. I've got a 20-foot deep area I'm doing this on, is to keep the soil covered. So if you've been weeding your garden and pulling out the weeds, roots and all, as many times as it's necessary to keep weeds out of your garden, you're disturbing the soil when you're pulling weeds out by the roots. I've cut my weeds down to the soil level, but I haven't pulled roots this year. And I didn't have enough to cover the entire back area, but I covered 1/3 of that back area with a pile of leaves. And it's probably, at least 24 inches in some areas, down to 12 inches in other areas. I've just covered the soil, and I'm really curious. I'm pretty sure the leaves will keep out the weeds from growing in that area, but I'll be curious what happens next year. But using regenerative practices, you can cover your soil with mulches and make sure it's deep enough. Mulches primarily, but leaves, also collecting your own leaves and spreading them like I have is a great way to reduce grain waste. And we all have a challenge to reduce grain waste. You can also harvest your own leaves from the ground and bag them up and use them as some of the browns if you do your own composting. So integrating livestock, that's really more focused on industrial agriculture. Oh, by the way, while I'm thinking of it, if you're interested in regenerative agriculture, there are a few YouTube TEDx videos that are fantastic. And I think I saw 2 of them. Both of them were less than 15 minutes long. They explain it much better than I am. Square foot gardening, this is another way of gardening. It's a very intensive way of growing vegetables, primarily in raised beds. And the notion here is to section off your garden bed into square feet. And if you're a devoted practitioner of the square foot gardening method, you have filled this raised bed with a fairly expensive way of, probably the most expensive way of building a soil or growing medium in which to grow your plants. I've done it before. It does it. You can achieve fantastic results. But the medium you put into those beds is pretty costly to put together. And what they do using this practice is you plant, depending on the plant size, a certain number of seeds per square foot. So, and I'm just using this off the top of my head. Say it's radishes. You put 12 12 evenly spaced holes in that 1 square foot, and you drop one seed into each hole. And they're very specific about using the seeds quite sparingly. So it's to save on seed costs. But you can be very productive. You can grow a lot of crops in a little square foot garden. Square foot gardening came from I think he was an engineer named Mel Bartholomew, and there's a book called Square Foot Gardening that you can purchase if you're interested in exploring that method of gardening. Okay, clear plastic, they call it mulch. I guess it is because it covers the soil. In the winter, you can use it to protect your soil for crusting, and you can use it you can use it at the late winter to warm up your soil. So if you're really anxious to get a head start out there in the garden and you need your soil temperature to come up a few degrees, this is one way you can achieve it. Also, plastic mulch can be used in the summer for solarization. I know I've read some great articles on solarization. So again, I would refer you to UCANR solarization. And you'll probably be able to pull up a PDF on how you achieve that. Weed mats, you can use them in your garden to protect the crops from weeds. I've introduced to you other ways to achieve minimizing weeds in your garden by keeping your soil covered with things other than weed mats, mulches, leaves, whatever. But it is an alternative. Okay, and this floating row covers is one of my favorite things to use. They're very inexpensive. They're very lightweight. They last from season to season, and they do a bunch of different things. You can use them for frost protection when it's cold outside, when it hits 105 degrees and you're afraid your tomatoes are going to get sunburned. You can drape them over your tomato plants. You can use them to keep flying insects out of your garden, and you have to remember to only use this on plants that don't require pollinators. So I put in cabbages at a garden I tend for a soup kitchen locally, and a week later when I went into the garden, I only have access once a week. The cabbages were gone. Well, I had little cabbage looper caterpillars in my that came in and decimated all the cabbages. So I put in cabbages again that following week and covered them with a floating row cover, and it worked wonders. So they really do have a lot of different uses, and they're very easy to use. And here's a couple pictures of what appear to be floating row covers, draped over, it looks like cattle panel there, draped over wire, just laid on the plants. And oh no, this one down here is supported by some sort of wire underneath it. If you use floating row covers to protect your plants on an emergency basis, you don't have a framework around your plants, please remember to go peel them off your plants after the whatever hazard you're trying to protect them from has passed. They absorb moisture. If you leave them sitting directly on your crops will get diseases and die. So peel them off there and put them somewhere else. Let them dry out in the sun or wherever. Drape them on a fan, dry them out, and then personally with mine, I just stuff them in garbage bags until I need them again. Okay, we really want to encourage people to stop and think before they use pesticides. As you probably know, we have a bee shortage problem. And it is a problem because their primary pollinator. So when you use a pesticide, you are harming pollinators and beneficial insects. And the thing is, most insects are beneficial. Yes, there are some that are not, but most of them are beneficial in your garden. So when you use a pesticide to kill the aphids on one of your plants that you probably could get rid of with hosing them down daily for however long it takes for them to disappear. When you choose a pesticide, you're killing beneficials. And also, there's runoff from those insecticides that eventually may end up in our oceans and groundwater. So please use it sparingly. It does, there are times when you have to use a pesticide, but there are other alternatives. Excuse me. I want to introduce you to the UC IPM website. Oh my God, I've gone over time. I'm sorry. IPM means Integrated Pest Management. So all you have to do to find this site is Google UC IPM. And this website will come up, and it's fabulous. It's got more information than you would ever believe. It's broken down into sub areas. I run out of time, so I can't go into it more, but please write down UCIPM, Integrated State Pest Management Program. Okay, I think we pretty much hit it. There's a lot of resources mentioned at the end of this presentation. I'm going to flip through a lot of online resources. I've tried to give you the search words, UCANR 84716 as I've gone through the presentation. There are a lot of them here I didn't mention. I'm out of time, and oh, by the way, your local library may also have our Master Gardener books. Those are also wonderful, cover a variety of topics and address challenges and best practices for your vegetable garden. I don't think we do surveys anymore since we've converted to Zoom meetings. Also, my final thing I'm going to say, the Master Gardeners have a help desk. The number is 209-953-6112. It's been staffed remotely during the pandemic. It's still being staffed. If you have specific questions, please feel free to call the help desk, or you can email us at ANRMG San Joaquin at UCANR.edu. I'm thinking somebody who worked in IT came up with that website address. Again, that's ANRMG San Joaquin at UCANR.edu. You can email with questions, and again, that is being managed remotely. So I'm sorry I've run over time. I want to thank you for attending this morning's presentation. And if you have specific questions, please feel free to reach out to us at the website or phone number I just gave you. We are here to help you. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin.